I'll call Brendan Burns.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I'd like to join with my colleague Phil Twyford in acknowledging the role of the Minister of Local Government in bringing this piece of legislation to the House and through the House. This may perhaps be the last bill that he brings to the House, and I wanted to acknowledge that I think this is a very sensible piece of legislation and the good work that he's done to bring it to this point. It is good, sensible legislation because it embodies a collectivist approach. It uses what sometimes might be regarded as the power and might of not the state, but in this case a collection of local authorities to use their collective might to bring down the rates that they borrow, to pass those lower rates on to their ratepayers to get more done for their ratepayer dollar. And that is a good option for local authorities. And when we consider some of the options and alternatives that are there in the marketplace and in government policy at the moment, such as asset sales, then I think this is a very sensible measure indeed. My colleague Stuart Nash picked up on a point which I was going to raise, and that is around one of the options that I think this might preclude, one hopes, but it's not that clear. And that is, my city of Christchurch obviously faces enormous debt costs in respect of the earthquakes of the past year. And in fact, the estimate for the rebuild of the CBD alone, and a plan released, a very fine plan, a futuristic focused plan from the City Council, put together by the city's planners in just 3 months. Normally a long-term plan like this would take some years. The estimate of that cost of that plan for the CBD alone, for the City Council, is of the order of $2 billion. Now that's a curious figure in this respect because the Christchurch City Council also owns around $2 billion of assets. And I applaud the Council for its visionary plan, and I say we do need instruments like this bill to allow the Council to borrow. Christchurch ratepayers are already facing a rate rise this year of some 7.1%, and about 1.5% of that is directly related to earthquake recovery costs. But there is another option that I fear, and it is that those assets of the City Council will be forced for sale by this government. And I'd like to ask the Minister if he's been aware of any discussions in respect of that as this bill has been brought together, because this bill embodies a sound principle that is around an entity like the Christchurch City Council being able to use the funding agency to borrow at competitive rates, to hold down the cost of rate increases for the good citizens of Christchurch as we try to fund our way through the enormous disaster that has befallen our city. But there is a matter of record on the 2011 report and the estimates of the Finance Minister from the Finance and Expenditure Select Committee is in fact the recognition that the sale of the Christchurch City Council assets as an alternative to the measures that this good bill introduces is there on the books, because as the report of the Finance and Expenditure Committee recorded, as the Canterbury Earthquake Recovery Act 2011 allows the sale of Christchurch City Council assets to fund the rebuilding of the city, we asked the Minister of Finance whether he could guarantee that this would not happen. The Minister said that this was a matter for the City Council to decide. He added government would not discuss cost sharing with the City Council, but it was important that the Council have a stake in the process, which included sharing the costs to ensure value for money was achieved. So there, on the record of the Parliament for another time, there is the fact that the Minister of Finance has acknowledged that there is capacity under the SERA legislation to require the sale of the City Council's assets in Christchurch, and I ask the Minister, can you confirm for us please, if that's been an issue that's been discussed as this bill was brought together, this is a sound, logical, sensible, pragmatic way to deal with the debts of Christchurch and other cities. Selling assets is a one-off sugar hit and it carries enormous long-term costs. Those assets in Christchurch have returned many hundreds of billions of dollars to our city. Orion, the power network alone, $1 billion in returns over the last 20 years. I think even the Minister might acknowledge that's a pretty formidable rate of return for any commercial organisation, and the thought that my ratepayers and the citizens of Christchurch may face another option to what this good bill provides is, I think, a very, very scary prospect. So I would like the Minister to comment on that point at some point through the committee stage.
The Honourable Pete Hodson.
Chairman, I think